Emily had lived in Maple Ridge long enough to recognize when the house felt off. But that evening, something tugged at her attention in a sharper way, as if the air itself carried a quiet worry she couldn't name. She had just finished cleaning the kitchen after dinner when she realized she hadn't heard her stepson Evan moving around at all. At 24, he was normally polite but distant, trying to adjust after returning home from college with a degree that didn't seem to open as many doors as he had hoped. Emily understood that young adults often needed space, but this silence felt heavy, like a storm cloud waiting to burst. She carried a bowl of warm soup toward his room, telling herself it was only to check on him. But deep down, she feared there was more happening behind that closed door than he let on. She stopped outside his room, noticing the door wasn't fully shut. A thin slice of light stretched across the hallway floor, and without meaning to, she glanced through the narrow opening. What she saw made her chest tighten. Evan wasn't asleep, nor was he relaxing like he sometimes pretended. He sat hunched over his desk, shoulders curved inward, staring at his laptop as if every word on the screen weighed him down. His hair was messy, his clothes wrinkled, and several empty coffee mugs crowded the corner of the desk. Unopened envelopes lay scattered beside him, and she instantly recognized the cold blue pattern of formal letters, the kind companies sent when they rejected job applications. She saw the glow of his inbox filled with more rejection emails, each subject line a reminder that he was trying and failing quietly. He rubbed his face with both hands, and she could hear a shaky breath escape him, not loud enough to be a sob, but painful enough that any caring person would feel it. It wasn't dramatic, it wasn't noisy, it wasn't messy. It was the quiet kind of sadness, the kind people hide because they don't want to bother anyone. In that moment, Emily realized Evan hadn't just been withdrawn. He had been battling disappointment alone, trying to keep it from her and his father because he didn't want to seem unprepared for life. She remembered how he used to be confident in his school projects, how he talked about future plans with excitement. But now he looked smaller somehow, like the world had pushed him too hard, too fast. She felt a sting of guilt, wondering if she had missed earlier signs or trusted his polite "I'm good too" easily. She didn't push the door open, didn't rush inside, didn't mention that she had seen the edge of his struggle. Instead, she gently tapped her knuckles on the door so he wouldn't think she had been watching him. He jumped a little, wiped his face quickly, and turned toward her with a forced smile, trying to look composed even though his eyes were tired and red from staring at the screen too long. She stepped in with the soup, pretending she had come only to give him something warm on a cold night. He thanked her the way people thank someone when they don't want to reveal how much they actually need the kindness. She set the bowl down, looked at the scattered letters and the glowing laptop before he could hide them, and finally said softly, "Evan, you don't have to go through everything alone." That single sentence broke the wall he had been holding up. He tried to brush it off, insisting he was fine. But his voice cracked just enough for her to hear the truth beneath the words. He admitted he didn't want to disappoint anyone, that he thought needing help made him a burden, that he felt embarrassed to come home without a job when his friends seemed to move forward faster. Emily felt her heart twist. She had never wanted him to feel like he was extra baggage or someone she had to tolerate. From the day she married his father, she had tried to create a space where Evan felt safe. But she now understood he had been trying too hard to appear strong. As he spoke, not dramatically, but honestly, she saw the courage in his vulnerability. He wasn't lazy, wasn't weak. He was simply overwhelmed by the transition into adulthood that so many young people struggle with, but rarely admit. She pulled out the chair beside him and sat quietly, letting him talk at his own pace. The more he spoke, the more she realized how much pressure he had been putting on himself, carrying expectations he thought everyone else had placed on him, even though no one actually had. He confessed that every rejection chipped away at his confidence, that every email felt like a reminder that he wasn't enough, and that he had been applying late at night so no one would notice his failures. Emily listened carefully, not interrupting, not lecturing, simply being present in a way he clearly needed. She assured him that no one expected perfection, that trying was already a sign of strength, and that he didn't need to hide his struggles to protect anyone's feelings. The more she spoke, the more the tension in his shoulders eased. She promised they would figure out the next steps together. Whether that meant rewriting his resume, practicing interviews, or looking at different paths he hadn't considered. For the first time in weeks, Evan let out a breath that sounded like relief instead of stress. And she could see the beginning of hope returning to his eyes. As she left the room later that night, she realized something important had shifted, not in a loud or dramatic way, but in a quiet, meaningful one. Evan wasn't alone anymore, and she wasn't standing on the outside of his world guessing what he felt. She had stepped into it gently and respectfully, and he had let her. She walked down the hallway with the empty soup bowl in her hands, feeling a mixture of sadness for the struggle he had carried and pride that he finally chose to share it. And though she didn't know what tomorrow would bring, she knew one thing clearly. That moment, that small crack in the silence, was the beginning of the healing he didn't even realize he needed. Emily woke the next morning with the conversation still echoing in her mind, the soft crack in Evan's voice replaying like a quiet reminder that he had been trying to survive in silence for far too long. She stepped into the kitchen, expecting the usual hush of the house. But instead she found Evan sitting at the table with his laptop open and a notebook full of scribbled ideas. Something about the sight made her pause, because even though he looked tired, he also looked determined in a way she hadn't seen in months. He glanced up quickly, almost embarrassed to be caught trying again. But she smiled in a way that told him he didn't have to hide his effort. The moment felt fragile, like a thin bubble of trust that needed careful handling. She poured him a cup of warm tea and sat across from him, not as a stepmother delivering a lecture, but as someone who genuinely wanted to help him find his footing again, without making him feel small. She gently guided the conversation toward what he wanted for his future, not what he thought he should want. Evan admitted he had been applying to every job he could find, just to meet expectations he assumed everyone had placed on him. He confessed he didn't even feel connected to half the positions he applied for, but felt pressured to look successful. Emily could see the truth behind the rushed applications and the exhaustion in his eyes. She told him that chasing everything wasn't the same as building something meaningful, and that he didn't have to measure his worth by the speed of his progress. Her words seemed to land somewhere deep because his shoulders loosened as if someone had lifted a weight he hadn't realized he was carrying. They spent the next hours working through his resume, cutting out sections that didn't sound like him and adding details he had overlooked. Emily asked questions that made him think about what he truly enjoyed, what made him feel confident, and what skills he didn't even recognize he had. Each time he answered, she watched him grow a little more sure of himself, as if the fog around him was slowly clearing. She reminded him that setbacks happen to everyone and that needing help didn't make him weak. It simply made him human. He listened in a way that showed he was finally letting the truth sink in, instead of pushing it away. At one point, he glanced up from his keyboard and said in a quiet tone, "I didn't want Dad to worry. I didn't want you to think I wasn't trying." Emily felt a sting in her chest at the thought that he had been carrying this fear alone. She told him gently that caring for someone didn't mean judging them and that no one expected him to move through life without challenges. She told him she admired him for not giving up even when things were hard. The words surprised him. She could see it in his eyes. He wasn't used to hearing appreciation in moments where he felt inadequate as they worked. Something shifted, not just in Evan, but in Emily too. Helping him opened a window inside herself that she had unknowingly kept shut for years. She had spent so much time supporting others, maintaining the house, balancing relationships, and trying to be a steady presence that she had forgotten what it felt like to have honest conversations about dreams and vulnerability. Guiding Evan reminded her of her own past, her own uncertainties, and the years when she had tried to figure out life alone after her first marriage ended. She had built herself back up slowly, but somewhere along the way she had learned to keep her emotions quiet. Listening to Evan reminded her how vital it was to let someone in, even a little. There was a moment somewhere between rewriting cover letters and searching new job fields, when Evan closed his laptop and looked at her with a sincerity she wasn't expecting. "Emily, you always show up for everyone. You help. You fix things. You make life easier for people. But when do you let someone help you? She wasn't prepared for that question, not in the middle of a morning filled with practical tasks. It struck her deeper than she expected because she couldn't remember the last time she handed her own worries to someone else. She tried to brush it off with a small smile, but Evan didn't look away. He wasn't asking to invade her privacy. He simply wanted her to feel supported the same way he now felt. That honesty touched her in a way she didn't show on the surface, but it sat quietly in her chest, warm and unsettling all at once. By the afternoon, they had planned a clear path, refine his portfolio, send targeted applications, rehearse interview answers, and follow up with contacts. Evan seemed lighter, more awake, more certain that his life wasn't stuck but simply paused. Emily felt a sense of pride she couldn't explain, a mixture of caring for him and realizing how much trust he had placed in her. She didn't feel like a replacement parent or a distant adult in his life. She felt like someone who mattered, someone who made a difference. That feeling stayed with her as he gathered his papers and thanked her sincerely. He wasn't thanking her out of obligation, but out of relief and genuine appreciation. Later, when she stepped outside to breathe in the cool afternoon air, she realized Evan's questions still circled her mind. She had spent so many years being strong that she had forgotten what it felt like to be supported. She wondered when she had started ignoring her own needs, when she had stopped chasing the small joys that used to make her feel alive, when she had started choosing routine over possibility. Evan's honesty didn't just help him. It awakened something in her. It made her look inward, asking herself if she had allowed her own life to shrink while lifting everyone else's. As the day ended, she found herself thinking about the parts of her life she had set aside, the hobbies she meant to revisit, the friendships she hadn't nurtured, the dreams she had paused because they didn't fit cleanly into her role at home. She realized she had been living on autopilot, just moving through days without feeling connected to anything that belonged solely to her. And for the first time in a long time, she felt a quiet yearning to rediscover the version of herself who once believed in new beginnings. She went to bed that night with a sense of purpose she didn't expect. She had helped Evan take his first step out of fear. But in doing so, she had unknowingly taken her own first step toward waking up a part of her life that had been silent for too long. Asterisk. Emily woke up the next morning feeling a strange mix of satisfaction and restlessness, a subtle pull in her chest that reminded her she hadn't cared for herself in a long time. Helping Evan had been rewarding in ways she hadn't expected. But now she realized she had spent so much energy lifting others that she had almost forgotten what it felt like to breathe for herself. The morning sun streamed through the kitchen window, warm and golden, and she poured herself a cup of coffee, sipping slowly as she stared out at the quiet street. The thought struck her suddenly. Maybe it was time to step outside the roles she had always played: mother, stepmother, caretaker, and just live in a moment that belonged entirely to her. She decided to take a morning off. No chores, no responsibilities, no reminders of life waiting at home. Just herself and the possibility of something unexpected. She chose Hillside Coffee, a small local cafe tucked away on a quiet corner of the neighborhood. The kind of place she had walked past countless times but never really entered. The smell of roasted beans hit her immediately, warm and comforting. And she found a window seat with a view of the street outside, letting the calm hum of life settle over her. She pulled out her notebook, intending to jot down thoughts and reflections she had been too busy to capture, when suddenly she dropped her keys onto the floor. Before she could bend down, a hand reached for them and a voice said, "You look like you've had a long week." She looked up and found herself staring into a pair of warm, clear eyes that held a gentle curiosity. The man handed her the keys, smiling in a way that made her feel both noticed and unguarded. His presence wasn't overwhelming, but it had a quiet weight, the kind that made her heart take notice without even realizing it. He introduced himself as Michael, a local graphic designer who loved the kind of mornings that started with coffee and quiet reflection. They began talking casually about the weather, the cafe, the books stacked on the shelves. Emily felt herself relaxing, laughter bubbling up in ways she hadn't allowed herself in months. Michael had a calm energy, attentive and unobtrusive, that made it easy for her to open up without feeling vulnerable. She found herself sharing small pieces of her life, the long days helping Evan, the quiet routines she had built to keep the house running, the small joys and frustrations she usually kept to herself. He listened without judgment, with a steady focus that made her feel truly seen. Each word she spoke seemed to matter in a way it hadn't in years, and for the first time in a long time. She felt the thrill of being understood. Their conversation stretched over hours without either of them noticing. He had a way of asking questions that sparked reflection. It's the kind that made her think about parts of her life she had ignored while focusing on everyone else. She realized she hadn't thought about her own happiness in a long time. And here was someone who made it safe to consider it again. She noticed how he smiled at her insights, how he reacted not out of expectation, but curiosity. And something inside her stirred a mixture of warmth, intrigue, and something she hadn't anticipated: hope. It was simple, understated, and yet profoundly moving to feel this quiet connection with someone who seemed to value her presence without expectation or pressure. Emily found herself telling Michael about Evan in broad strokes, careful to respect his privacy, but also admitting how helping him had reminded her of her own needs. She explained how seeing him struggle had awakened a part of her that longed for connection and support in her own life. How she had spent so many years giving that she forgot to receive. Michael nodded, genuinely attentive, and she realized she hadn't felt understood in this way in years. The conversation made her aware of the subtle ways she had been protecting herself, keeping her heart cautiously tucked behind responsibilities and routine. Yet here with him, the armor seemed unnecessary. The small walls she had built around her feelings gently dissolving. After a while, the conversation turned to lighter topics. Shared interests and dreams yet to be realized. Michael spoke about his work, his passions, the books that inspired him. And Emily felt herself laughing, sharing ideas, and imagining possibilities she hadn't allowed herself to consider for a long time. The way he looked at her, attentive, respectful, genuinely curious, stirred feelings she hadn't expected to experience again. She was aware of the spark, but it was subtle, gentle, not overwhelming. The kind of attraction that grows naturally in the comfort of connection. It made her reflect on the question Evan had asked the day before. When was the last time she let someone help her? She realized Michael was showing her what that could look like: a partnership of attention, respect, and mutual care. As the morning slipped into afternoon, Emily noticed the warmth spreading in her chest. The cafe buzzed softly around them. Yet in that corner by the window, time seemed to slow, allowing her to savor the moment without guilt or distraction. She realized that this unexpected encounter was awakening something dormant inside her, a part of her heart she had neglected while focusing on others' needs. She felt alive in a way she hadn't in years, noticing the small thrill of connection, the gentle excitement of discovery, and the quiet courage it took to open herself to something new. Eventually, they had to part ways, but not before exchanging numbers and agreeing to meet again. As she walked back toward home, Emily felt the shift inside her more clearly than ever. Helping Evan had brought her joy and pride. But this encounter with Michael awakened a longing she hadn't realized she still carried: a desire for companionship, laughter, and connection on her own terms. She understood that life could offer both responsibilities and the chance for joy, that caring for others didn't mean sacrificing herself, and that the small steps she took toward opening her heart could change everything. By the time she reached her driveway, she was smiling softly, aware of the anticipation she felt for the next meeting with Michael. It wasn't about rushing or forcing anything, but about noticing the way life could surprise her when she allowed herself to step outside her familiar routines. She thought about Evan, about the lessons in vulnerability and support they had shared. And she realized that helping him had prepared her to embrace this new chapter of her own life. That evening, she carried a lightness she hadn't felt in years, kind that hinted at beginnings, possibilities, and the quiet excitement of being seen. She understood, for the first time in a long while, that opening her heart didn't have to be risky or reckless. It could simply be a natural step toward discovering happiness she deserved. And as she lay down that night, she couldn't stop smiling at the thought of the simple, profound connection she had made, knowing that the next morning might bring even more unexpected joy and self-discovery. Emily woke that evening with a flutter in her chest she hadn't felt in years, a mix of anticipation and nervous excitement that made even the simplest tasks at home feel lighter. She had just returned from Hillside Coffee, still smiling at the memory of Michael's calm, attentive presence and the way their conversation had flowed so easily. It was unlike anything she had experienced in a long time, and she realized she was looking forward to seeing him again, to sharing more of herself without fear or hesitation. But as she opened the door to her house, the familiar hum of quiet routines was interrupted by an unexpected sight. Evan sitting in the living room, his posture slightly more relaxed than usual, a small, hopeful smile on his face. "Emily," he said, his voice a mix of pride and relief, "I got a job interview. It's because of the plan we made together. You helped me see I could do it." The weight in her chest shifted instantly, a mixture of pride and deep emotion flooding through her. She had helped him, truly, and the result was tangible, not just the opportunity for a new job, but the glow of confidence returning to his eyes, the way he held himself as if he belonged to the world again. Emily knelt beside him briefly, touching his shoulder lightly in a gesture of encouragement, careful to respect his personal space while conveying how proud she was. She listened as he talked about the preparations he had made, the practice interviews, the follow-ups, and the small adjustments he had made to his resume, and she realized that this moment was more than professional success. It was the reclaiming of self-worth and determination that he had lost while carrying his burdens alone. Evan's gratitude was sincere, unforced. And Emily felt an unexpected warmth in her chest, knowing she had been part of his journey back to confidence. The satisfaction of helping him was profound, but it also sparked a reflection within her about her own life, about the opportunities she had deferred, the desires she had set aside, and the joy she had postponed while focusing entirely on others. As Evan continued to speak, Emily took a moment to share something personal herself, telling him briefly about her morning at Hillside Coffee and the encounter with Michael. She didn't frame it as a romantic revelation, only as a step she had taken to honor herself and explore what it felt like to be cared for in return. Evan listened attentively, a smile tugging at his lips, and she realized that he genuinely understood the significance of supporting others while also accepting support. "Then go," he said after a pause, almost as if passing on an unspoken blessing. "You've always been there for all of us. Now it's your turn. Let someone be there for you." The simplicity of his words hit her harder than she expected, and she felt a mix of emotion, gratitude, relief, and a soft, glowing anticipation for what her life could hold beyond her role as caregiver. Later that night, Emily prepared for her date with Michael, carefully choosing her outfit, not to impress anyone, but to honor herself, to step into a space where she could be fully present, fully alive, and fully attentive to her own happiness. She felt a sense of empowerment she hadn't felt in years. The recognition that pursuing her own joy didn't diminish her love or care for Evan or her family. Rather, it added depth to her presence in their lives. She reflected on the path that had led her here, from quietly noticing Evan's struggles to helping him rebuild his confidence, to embracing her own opportunity for connection. Each step had been deliberate, small, and meaningful. And now it culminated in a moment that felt entirely hers, a balance of giving and receiving that she had not realized she needed so desperately at the restaurant. Michael greeted her with the same calm energy and warm attentiveness that had drawn her in at the cafe. They spoke easily, effortlessly, sharing stories, laughter, and reflections on life that neither had spoken aloud to anyone else in a long time. Emily found herself sharing pieces of her past and present she had kept private, not out of vulnerability for its own sake, but because she felt safe, seen, and understood. Michael listened, asked thoughtful questions, and responded with the kind of empathy that made her feel valued not just as a caretaker, not just as a stepmother, but as a woman with her own experiences, hopes, and dreams. The hours passed quickly, and Emily noticed the lightness in her chest, the natural ease that comes from genuine connection. A feeling she had forgotten was possible. Meanwhile, Evan prepared for his interview with a quiet focus he hadn't felt in months. He reviewed notes, rehearsed answers, and reminded himself of the encouragement Emily had given him. He thought about the conversations they had shared, the plans they had made together, and the way she had made him feel capable and understood. Her presence had been a steady, grounding force in his life. And now he felt equipped to step forward confidently into an opportunity that had seemed unreachable just days before. As he left for his interview, he paused at the door and whispered a soft, grateful thought. She finally chose her happiness, and I'm proud of her. Back at her date, Emily felt a sense of wholeness she hadn't experienced in years. Helping Evan had reminded her of the power of compassion, patience, and attentive care. But opening herself to Michael reminded her that life could hold joy, excitement, and companionship for her as well. She realized that growth and healing weren't linear, that moments of vulnerability and courage could coexist, and that embracing life fully meant allowing both giving and receiving to flow naturally. The evening ended with a quiet walk under the city lights, conversations flowing easily, laughter punctuating shared insights, and the comfort of mutual respect and curiosity. Emily felt hopeful and alive, aware that the steps she had taken, small, deliberate, and compassionate, had led her to a place of renewed self-discovery and unexpected joy. When she returned home that night, the house felt different, not because anything had changed structurally, but because she had shifted within it. She saw Evan's room down the hall, silent and calm, a symbol of the resilience she had helped nurture. And she realized that supporting others didn't mean sacrificing her own life. Fit meant creating a space where everyone could thrive, including herself. As she lay in bed, her mind replayed the events of the past days, the quiet conversation with Evan, the small victories, the reflection on her own needs, the unexpected connection with Michael, and the anticipation of new beginnings. She felt a sense of completeness, an understanding that life's beauty often arrived quietly, through patience, attentiveness, and the courage to step into unfamiliar moments. Emily drifted to sleep that night with a quiet smile, feeling grateful for the journey she had navigated, the lives she had touched, and the doors she had opened for herself. She understood in a deep, satisfying way that life's most meaningful changes often start with small acts of care, honesty, and courage, and that embracing both love and support, whether for others or for herself, was the key to moving forward. The night was calm, the house peaceful, and Emily felt ready for whatever awaited her next, secure in the knowledge that she had nurtured both growth and happiness for Evan, for herself, and for the future she was beginning to embrace with hope and quiet excitement.